Good morning and welcome to this virtual coffee morning. First one that BlueSource have hosted, so bear with us if we don't get this 100% right, but welcome this morning. With us today, we've got Ross Asquith, who's the product marketing manager for Netskope. He's worked in the sales engineering team, so what you're going to have is someone very technically fluent with all aspects of the Netskope platform. And now what he's doing is focus on helping enterprise with their transformation of their security architecture to deliver the today's mobile and cloud first world. So Ross, hello and welcome. Glad to have you on board today.
Thank you, Don.
Brilliant to have you there. Also, and hopefully you've had those coffee packs, we've got Jack Miller from UE Coffee Roasters. I've been calling them roosters. I think I'm not getting it right. So Jack, welcome.
Thanks, John. Good morning.
Thanks, Jack. I know Jack's going to go into it, but what we have with us is UE Roasters are the only wood power artisan commercial coffee roasters. So I think we're going to get some, that's going to be one of the highlights for me today. Obviously Netskope, and it's going to be key. But having Jack on, and Jack's basically worked with high-end specialty coffee for the last 3 years, and at UE Coffee Roasters, he's head of training and development. So I'm really looking forward to hearing and seeing a bit more of that later on as well. So everyone, welcome this morning. Really appreciate you joining as well. I see we've got a few more joiners there. So hi Steve, hi David as well. Thanks for joining. So we've got a few customers on there, but we've got a few people that hopefully maybe in the future may be customers. So my name's John Ford. I'm a director here at BlueSource. I support and run the sales team. And what I wanted to do was just spend 2 minutes on, we've just recently announced the reasoning behind why have we partnered with Netskope today, and you've come and kindly shared some of your time with us today. So BlueSource, for those of you that don't know, been set up 20 years, and we've been solving problems that I put down at the bottom in those nice blue boxes around data, the need to move it, protect it, be able to govern it, obviously, and collaborate it. But what we've done is we've been a Microsoft partner for the last 20 years. So we've seen that Exchange, moving SharePoint, and what we feel we've done, the value we bring to customers such as Morgan Sindall, Schroders, Barclays, RBS, to name a few, the value we bring is finding and understanding the gaps. And where we started was very much on the discovery and compliance world. So we partnered with Veritas to make sure we could capture those emails and those documents, and also then for the compliance teams. So again, making sure your email was protected. We partnered with Broadcom Symantec at the time for their Message Lab solution. So we've seen the gaps that Microsoft brings. And of course, with that move to the cloud now, with that move to Teams and remote working, and obviously Azure and cloud, we've seen the other gaps that come up. And those gaps typically for us are around the user access to Teams, for instance. We've partnered with Torsion, and more now we're seeing that shadow IT. We're seeing the risks associated with moving to the cloud and taking advantage of either Azure or Office 365. So we've seen, what are our customers asking us? And that data-centric view BlueSource have means that the partnership with Netskope allows us to look at that DLP now in the cloud. Allows us to look at CASB and making sure that that brokerage side, and Key and Ross is going to go into it much more eloquently than I will, but the next generation of the gateway and how we manage various applications sitting on various different cloud platforms and various different SaaS type ways, and how do we enable our customers to protect their prized data in that way. So BlueSource, we deliver envisaging, design services, implementation and managed services as well. Been doing that for 20 years. Thank you for your time today. We're going to take some messages as we go along. It's a virtual coffee shop we're in. Please feel free to use the questions button and drop your question in there, and we'll endeavor to get to some of those as well. And listen, they don't have to be about BlueSource or Netskope. If you have any coffee questions, hopefully the packs have arrived. They're actually fantastic looking. So thanks to all the people in the background that managed to get them out to everyone's house. So without further ado, any questions, please pass them into the Q&A. We'll get to answer those towards the end of the session. Enjoy, have a great session. And Ross, I will pass over to you.
Thanks very much, John. So yeah, I'm very conscious I'm now standing between everybody and their coffee. So I'm going to keep this one short, but I did want to talk a little bit about not so much Netskope, but about the kind of landscape we're playing in, and why Netskope, Bluesource together maybe should be having a conversation with you about your security. And specifically, I'm going to talk about security transformation, which is kind of what I spend most of my time talking about with our clients and customers. So as John said, I'm on the product marketing side of things, but I have a kind of technical background, but this isn't going to be such a technical presentation. I did promise Vijay and John that I would theme my presentation around coffee. We've done a few of these virtual events recently, and I always try and put the theme in. I did struggle a bit. I started off by looking for coffee memes because everyone loves a good meme. And I found a couple of references, obviously, to the fact that people seem to need coffee. There's this dependency thing going on. And then the other memes I found were all to do with the effects of coffee, right? So I guess at the moment we're all in the left-hand picture waiting for our coffee. And then we'll see what happens afterwards, right? But I realized when I found this meme that actually I didn't know much about coffee, but I did know a fair bit about gremlins. And so I've switched the theme of my presentation, and I thought I'd do it around gremlins instead. And if you're too young to remember gremlins, it's obviously the 1984 classic comedy horror. And at this time of year, it gets quite popular because it is a bit of a Christmas film, although that is debated. And so I thought I'd try and end that debate using Google Trends. And if you look up gremlins on Google Trends, what you'll find is that it does begin to peak around the holiday season. Therefore, I conclude that Gremlins is a Christmas film for all those doubters out there. But while I was also on Google Trends, I thought, let's look up digital transformation and bring this presentation back on topic, because digital transformation is something of a buzzword that lots of people are talking about. Lots of organizations want to or are digitally transforming. And if you look back over the last, well, I went back kind of 10 years, you can see this rise in interest of digital transformation. It isn't something that's suddenly arrived in the last 12 months. It's something that's been growing over time. And it's something that is interpreted in lots of different ways. Now, when we talk about digital transformation within a business, we're typically talking about the way that data is handled, the way that users are working, and so on. And this year's been an interesting year for digital transformation. Most organizations are on a journey from what was a big centralized store of their data and their users actually being in a central place to more of a disparate environment. So they move from one big data center to many smaller centers of data. And I can't take any credit for that wordplay because that was Gartner that said that. But what they mean is your data is no longer within that fixed perimeter. Your users aren't within your offices. Instead, they're working from home, they're mobile, they're on different types of devices that may or may not belong to the organization. Your data is in cloud services like Office 365 or in data stores that belong to Amazon. And this means that the way that we need to secure our environment and protect our data and manage and govern the usage of the internet has changed fundamentally. So again, transformation, I call it a journey because it is for most organizations. And two of the core things that contribute to digital transformation are the adoption of cloud and the increased mobility of users, so remote working, as we often call it. And for most organizations, if we looked over time at what they were doing, this is the kind of journey they were taking. They went from a place in the past where they didn't really work remotely, everyone came to the office, and cloud didn't exist or was very not widely used, to a place now, we're around 2020, where there's lots of people remote working, obviously, and lots of cloud services being consumed, and that's going to continue into the future. So what happened this year? Well, the gremlins came. We had a bit of an issue this year. For most organizations, what that meant was their plan was disrupted and some chaos ensued, but most businesses have ridden this change. And what we saw, as you can kind of see here, I've represented it with the gap in the chart, was a jump, firstly to the right in terms of remote working that was forced upon us by the need to home work, by the need to be quarantined or whatever. So suddenly we were at home and working more than we ever did, and our workforces were. And that brought challenges with it. The challenges of home life, dealing with children being at home with us, or perhaps, dealing with pets in the house, barking dogs or singing Mowgli's or whatever. But we also had a challenge around continuing to work and needing to collaborate. And that meant that we adopted collaboration apps, the likes of Teams and Slack and Zoom. And we saw this leap up in the consumption of cloud services as well. So in summary, what did 2020 do, and the kind of crisis that we found ourselves in? It accelerated this digital transformation. And it meant that businesses had to look at new ways of securing, governing, enabling that kind of usage. So against this backdrop, let's look at the security tools that have traditionally been used. So back in the day, when we didn't have mobile workers and we didn't have cloud services, then the right way to do security was to have an on-premises security stack. Okay, have boxes, appliances typically in a data center, because that's where all our data was, and that's where all our users were behind. And that meant that we could, enforce the sorts of controls that we wanted to enforce, be it data loss prevention or filtering our web access or inspecting our email flow and so on. If you were an organization that, encouraged remote working or allowed or enabled remote working, but you didn't adopt cloud, then you'd shift over to the right on my diagram, and you could probably get away with some form of cloud-based web proxy. And I'm sure you can think of, vendors that made that transition, secure web gateway vendors that, delivered their services from the cloud. But being in the cloud isn't the same as understanding and managing the cloud. Some organizations maybe didn't have lots of remote workers, but they did perhaps adopt cloud in a big way. And so in that scenario, you could continue to use your on-premises security, but you're going to have to augment it with some additional controls. And that's where kind of the traditional or initial CASB solutions came in. Maybe they helped you understand what data you were putting into those cloud applications that you were adopting, be they Salesforce or Box or Office 365 most commonly. But of course, these are kind of outlier positions. I've already said that for most organizations, remote working, mobility goes hand in hand with the adoption of cloud services. And so they're moving up to the top right. And there is a solution that helps secure that type of usage. It's quite new. It's been defined by Gartner just last year. And that was what they've called SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge. So Gartner are a big fan of acronyms, obviously, and SASE is a particularly catchy one. But what SASE said was that what you've traditionally been doing in your data center or in your branch office, if you've needed to break out locally there, is you've been doing all your security with appliances and controls and boxes. And what you need to be doing is thinking about moving that into the cloud. So you reduce the security tools that you have within your data center or your branch. You instead utilize them in the cloud or use services that deliver those capabilities and components in the cloud. And you reduce your branch office or any of your offices to connectivity to that cloud service that's doing the security. So whether that's SD-WAN or some sort of forward steering from the client or from the firewall, really you're not doing any kind of inspection or control at the branch. You're doing it all in the cloud, but you just need a reliable way to steer traffic there. Now, the thinnest branch of all, of course, is the home worker. We're all sitting in our kitchens, spare bedrooms, home offices, and we are an office of one. And that's why SASE is so relevant to this kind of scenario of remote working from home. So it's very timely that Gartner kind of invented it, although it was obviously evolving itself. They simply put a name upon it. So we could talk about other vendors in this presentation, but we're not going to talk about Netskope. I'm sure you can think about who I might mean when I talk about the on-premises security stack, those traditional appliances for filtering web traffic and so on. And those companies have so struggled to move into the cloud that really it's only those that are natively born in the cloud that can say that they are SASE. And Netskope, obviously, I would say we're SASE, but there are other people saying that we're SASE. In fact, Netskope's progress in the SASE framework is further along than any other vendor. And this quote actually wasn't attributed to Gizmo. It was a different G. It was Gartner. Gartner said this in their Magic Quadrant for cloud access security brokers. They said that we're further along than any other vendor in that quadrant towards this SASE architecture that they've defined as a future, and makes a great deal of sense. So if you think back to the previous slide where I had some of the components of SASE, and there were things like Secure Web Gateway and CASB and Zero Trust Network Access and DLP and threat protection, all those things that we know should be part of our security stack. all delivered from the cloud. It looks a bit like this. So this is a Netskope kind of diagram of SASE and all the components of it that Gartner kind of listed out as being part of SASE. And I want to sort of zoom in on one, and that's the secure web gateway, because I think the secure web gateway is very much at the core of SASE, because ultimately, in order for the secure access service edge to work, there needs to be this inline inspection of your traffic. And that is something that the secure web gateway has traditionally done, but it has its limitations. So just like the original Gremlins evolved 6 years later into Gremlins 2, and we saw them change and adapt, and we saw flying gremlins and we saw spider gremlins and so on, so the secure web gateway needs to evolve and change. From the traditional appliances with their limited capabilities and their kind of location within our data center, they need to move. And that's because they're generally blind to a lot of what's going on in terms of the internet traffic that your users are generating and the applications they're visiting. So we know now that over half of web traffic is going not to websites, but to cloud applications. And if you're not therefore inspecting SSL traffic, you're missing all of those cloud application activities and the data that's moving to them, plus probably even more, because something like 90% of web traffic is now encrypted. And we still find lots of organizations that aren't doing SSL inspection at their gateway. And sometimes that's because their appliance is resource constrained and it can't do it. Other times, maybe it's some sort of regulatory thing that we need to work around with the customer. Ultimately, something like 95% of cloud usage, cloud application usage, is outside of IT's control. And this is what John mentioned earlier, the shadow IT. It's so important to understand where your data is going and what applications are being used, and then control that in order to better protect your data. And then lumped on top of all of this is this remote working. It has changed the game. Having a data center is less relevant than ever in terms of where you put your security controls. You need to protect users wherever they are. So Netskope has launched a campaign, if you like, and BlueSource are part of this, to prove to organizations that you need to move your secure web gateway capabilities. You need to move towards SASE, and the first step is to look at a next generation secure web gateway, because the next generation of secure web gateways are able to solve all those challenges I just outlined. And so our goal here is to prove it to you. And we would like to prove it with a demonstration, either in our environment or within your own environment, or through some sort of proof of concept. And we want to prove a series of 7 things. So we came up with 7 core challenges. And someone's messed with my slide here and changed it to 8, but it's 7. We want to give you visibility of the SaaS applications being used in your environment in a way that your traditional secure gateway can't. We want to show you how you can manage access to your apps from personal devices, or BYOD. We want to show you what it looks like when you can see data moving between Office 365 and these other shadow IT applications that are undoubtedly being used in your environment, and how you don't have to just block users all the time. Instead, you can coach them, or you can ask them to justify their actions and let them continue. It's less black and white than the traditional methods of managing internet usage. We also want to show you how we can detect data being created in the cloud. You know, if you go to Office 365 and you go to Word Online and you actually type sensitive data into that environment rather than, you know, uploading a file in the traditional sense, how can you prevent that from being stored in the cloud or created in the cloud? And we'd like to show you some of the more advanced ways that we can detect sensitive data using machine learning and artificial intelligence to recognize certain types of sensitive data, typically images like passport images or screenshots and things like that. And finally, not forgetting the threats that we need to protect against. You know, threats have evolved too. We see many types of malware and threats delivered from cloud applications. Just as you're using cloud applications, so are the bad guys. Cloud phishing is one example of that, where we're using simple cloud-based forms created in Google Docs or created in SharePoint to actually phish people's credentials. And then lastly, okay, I didn't put that on there. Someone's again messed with my slide. That's nothing to do with me. So prove it is a call to action for you. Speak to BlueSource, speak to us, and we'll put you in touch with BlueSource, however you want to do it, about proving that the need for a next-gen secure web gateway is real, if you don't know it already, and we'd like to show you how we can do it. So thanks for listening to my Gremlins-themed security transformation presentation, and I'm going to hand back to John, and he's going to talk to us about coffee.
Ross, listen, thank you very much. And any presentation or a couple of minutes and brings in Gremlins seamlessly is fantastic. So thank you for bringing back one of my favorite Christmas. I'm not sure the new batch though. I'm not sure that ever was one top of my list. Just a reminder, there's some questions and answers. There's a couple that come up here. I won't spend too long on those, but one, can we ask a question about protecting Microsoft Office 365 from a point of view? Blue Source, we've got a couple of ways of looking at that. One is, making sure if you do have someone that gets in, being able to recover, so backing up Office 365, yes. But anything, Ross, from a Netskope point of view of that question?
Yeah, Office 365 is obviously probably the most common cloud application we see. We actually secure the largest Office 365 deployment in the world, a Fortune 1 company. But one of the most common things we talk to customers about is actually identifying your Office 365 instance. It's not good enough just to say that, oh yeah, we allow access to office.com, because what you need to be doing is looking at your instance of Office, because in other instances of Office can be hosted threats, or your data could be uploaded to them and you've lost control of it. So it's that levels of granularity when you're looking at Office 365 that we often talk to people about, to say, you need to understand the difference between your instance and someone else's instance, because it could be the difference between safe and danger, or data safe and data lost. So yeah, Office 365 is, it's a big thing for us. So lots of controls we could talk about in more detail in a follow-up.
Cool. Okay, brilliant. Listen, there's another question there as well, but what I'll do is, I think people have got we've all got these coffee paraphernalia around us. Without any further ado, let's get to understand what we do. Jack, really looking forward to this section. Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. And thanks, Ross, as well. Good to get a couple of Gremlins references in there, something everyone will recognize. But as you mentioned, John, everyone's had this coffee stuff sitting here for a little while, only a couple of days. Maybe you've dug into it already and brewed yourself a couple of cups of coffee. I know I would have if I'd received a pack of coffee. I don't think anyone said.
Jack, we're waiting for you, because I was afraid to touch it. It arrived yesterday, so I thought I would wait for you. So no, we're looking for your expert.
Awesome. So yeah, what I wanted to do was just run through the pack with you. Everything that you've got in there should be fairly self-explanatory, but I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. I was going to talk to you a little bit about us here at UE Coffee Roasters. I'm sure you've seen the big UE logo all over some of these bits of kit. That's kind of a new thing, actually. On the 1st of December, we relaunched our website. It's all very brand new, really nice little Christmas video on there. On the top of your box of coffee, there's a little QR code, and that will take you straight to the UE Coffee Roasters website, which is just uecoffeeroasters.com. And there's a nice Christmas video on there, and you can see a lot of information about what we're doing and the different kinds of coffee that we've got. And there's quite a good range as well. There's coffees from all over the world, and a bit of information about how we roast them, some of the equipment we use, and the rest of our team. I'll give you the go ahead on when to start boiling your kettle. I've got mine just down here, so hopefully you don't have to go too far as well. I can see, John, you're in the kitchen, so that's a good place to be. And I'd also suggest having a spoon ready so you can scoop your coffee, something you can dispose of any. We're going to do some rinsing of our filter before we use it, so somewhere to dispose of your water. And also, if you have any milk or anything like that in your coffee, have some of that to hand. I'd advise obviously not having milk in your coffee, because you want to really taste the coffee's flavors and not have to not be kind of covering those up with anything adding. I'm always pushing that with customers. If I see them grab the sugar without even tasting it, I always say, have a little taste first, because it may be different to some other coffee that you've had before. And that's something that we're really interested in here, is giving people a new coffee experience. To some people, coffee is just a way of waking up in the morning. It doesn't matter what it tastes like, just make it hot and strong, and it just wakes you up. But I've experienced some really delicious coffee, and I've gone down this huge rabbit hole of brewing, tasting different roasts from all around the world, different roasters, and visiting new coffee shops that you have to go down little alleyways to find, and those are often the best places. And I'd like to share with you today some really interesting coffee. This is what you got in your pack. It's the UE Coffee Roasters Hullabaloo Christmas Coffee. Hullabaloo is just the name that we've given our Christmas coffee every year. This particular one you got all the information on the top there. This one is from Brazil and Uganda. So it's a couple of different, very, very different origins for coffee. Brazil is the biggest coffee producer in the world. At one point, they were producing about a third of all coffee consumed around the world. It's a huge country, and lots of it is capable of producing coffee. They grow it at high altitude, low altitude, very high quality coffee, and also the kind of commodity coffee that goes into your instant coffee. So it's a huge variation. This Ugandan coffee as well is really interesting. It's from the kind of west side of Uganda in the Rwenzori Mountains. I hope I said that right. I don't know. But it's a very high altitude, which is where the best coffee grows, because there's
Jack, just on that, it's like whiskey, you know, you get a blended whiskey or you get a single malt. Why would you mix a Brazilian coffee with a Ugandan coffee? Sorry to drop you on the spot, non-rehearsed, I promise anyone. Why would you do that?
No, that's a really great question. And I always encourage questions because I want people to have a really good understanding, because it's really interesting. And like you said, why would you want to mix two really good coffees and potentially ruin their kind of single malt or single origin characteristics? We do have both of these coffee. We've got the Brazilian coffee we offer as a single origin too, and it's really tasty on its own. But adding the Uganda in there gives it this really nice fruitiness that the Brazil doesn't offer. So you get that nice balance of the Brazilian coffee has a really smooth, full body, a bit like wine. It's used, coffee and wine are very similar in the way that you can describe them. You have tasting notes like on the box here, you see cranberry, candy, and nougat. I think there's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because it's a Christmas coffee, but there is actually some kind of characteristics of that candy sweetness and a kind of cranberry. There's almost like a dryness to it, but it's all perceptions as well. Not everyone's going to taste the same thing. So they are good on their own, but blended, they both bring something different, and it makes them a more well-balanced and well-rounded coffee. So that's kind of the answer to that one. So that's the coffee that you've got in the pack there, and it's pre-ground already for your filter brewer, because the grind size is different for each kind of brewing method. And you'll see there's lots of different brewing methods in your brew guide. In here, we're going to be following the kind of pour over method, which is what you'll be using with this one. And you've also got some paper filters, and you can just pop these open. You've got about 80 in there, and then non-bleached, it's paper. So you'll have your coffee in there and you pour the water over the top, and we'll come back to that shortly when we do the brew. So yeah, pre-ground the coffee for you. Ideally, you would grind your coffee fresh, because as soon as you grind it, it begins to deteriorate. It has lots more surface area and lots more oxygen can get to it. So as with any food or consumable, freshness kind of deteriorates over time, but in bean form, it lasts a little bit longer. And also, there's nothing better than freshly roasted, freshly ground coffee. So if you've got a nice pack of fresh coffee, you grind the beans and you get this amazing aroma. And that is lost a little bit with pre-ground coffee, but it should still be good because it was only a few days ago that it was ground. Friday, when I posted them out, I ground them fresh then. Okay, so also in your pack, you will have a couple of little packets of, these are cantuccini. They're very much like biscotti, but without the chocolate. They were made in-house by our very talented chef, Pav. He came up with the two versions, one with the pistachio and almonds, and one without any nuts. But if anyone is allergic to nuts, then in the note in the box, it does say they were prepared in the kitchen where there are nuts also. So there may be a very slight chance of cross-contamination. So people who are very allergic, be careful. But these are very delicious, and they're really nice dipped in your coffee as well. So if you haven't already scoffed them down, like I would have. Sorry, lost an earbud there. Yeah, if you haven't already eaten those, you can dip them in your coffee today once we've brewed. VJ's very kindly provided some lovely little keep cups. Keep Cup are one of the top kind of takeaway reusable cup brands. These are branded with a Netskope. It's an 8-ounce cup with a nice lid as well, and that's got a little drinking hole. So we can use this for brewing today, unless you've got your favorite mug that you like to use. I've always got my favorite mug to hand, but I'll be brewing into this one. It's quite a small one, so it'll be quite a small brew that we make. But with this brew, it's actually got 2 holes in the bottom, So you can, if you want to, place that across 2 cups. So you got them side by side, and you can brew a bigger brew, or you can brew into a bigger container or something else. And one of the other things in your pack is this little information about the Hullabaloo coffee. I always like to have something to hand about the coffee that I'm drinking while I'm drinking it. I feel like when you get a bit of a story and a bit of information about it, it really helps bring it to life. Otherwise, you know, if you don't know what you're drinking, it doesn't make it quite as interesting. So you got that there, you can have a look at that while you're sipping. I'd say now is a good time to flick the switch on the kettle. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to do that. Nice and easy for me, I've already done that. So get your kettle on the go now. And I've actually got some scales as well. I always brew coffee with scales because I like to be very precise. It's going to be a 15-gram dose of coffee that I'm going to be using, but I'll show you what that looks like in scoops if you haven't got scalers with you. It's only going to be a little bit, and then this is quite a large brewer. It's able to do probably a litre of coffee, but we're only going to be brewing about a quarter of a litre today into our little Netskope keep cups, unless you have your other mug. So while kettle's boiling, just checking that it is. The other things I want to talk to you about quickly was like how we roast and how we source our coffee. It's quite interesting actually. Quite often people don't really think about where the coffee comes from. So Brazil, we know, and Uganda is where our Hullabaloo coffee has come from today. But all the way over in Brazil, or the other way in Uganda, this is what the green coffee looks like. Not too many people have really seen the green coffee before. It's very raw, and it's got this kind of grassy smell. These are very dense beans, and they grow on plants that vary in size. They're shrubs or trees. They're normally kind of somewhere from this high up to kind of 10 feet or so. And they grow, it's like a cherry. And you get 2 seeds normally back to back in a cherry, kind of face to face. And then once the skin of the cherry and the pulp and the mucilage has been removed, you end up with this green bean. So when you hear people talking about green beans, it's not the vegetable, unless they're talking about those. But for coffee, it's these kind of green beans, which we're then going to put into our roaster. So those are the, on the farm, they're harvested because we deal with very high quality coffee. They're normally hand picked. Otherwise, you can get all the non-ripe cherries and all that defective ones. So they pick all the best cherries and put them in together, remove all the skin and the fruit, and then dry them down to about 10% moisture, which is what we receive in green form here. We then roast them. You can see the difference in the size of the beans. They pretty much double in size. It's quite interesting to see them side by side and be able to smell them. And if anyone's ever in the Witney area, which is where we're based, just about 20 minutes west of Oxford, you can come by and have a look in the roastery. Maybe at the end of this session, if I get a chance to go down to the roasting floor, perhaps we can have a quick look at some of the equipment and some of the live roasting happening. It's quite a busy, bustling place because there's a cafe down there too. But yeah, they'll be roasting some nice fresh coffee today, and we'll be drinking some now. So I can hear the kettle rumbling away down there. Meanwhile, if you grab your brewer and one of your paper filters, and John, also, if I can't see any questions coming in, but if any do, if you could just fire them over. I didn't see those other ones come up earlier on.
Someone's just asked, is it too early to make my coffee Irish? So I think no, that might be my question. Sorry. Yes.
Well, you did mention an espresso martini to me this morning.
Yeah.
So
we've gone from a Gremlins one earlier to a alcoholic one now, but no, it's interesting. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah. So with your paper filter, I normally fold down this bottom piece and fold in the side. This just helps it to sit really nicely in the brewer. So then when you open it up, that just sits very snugly inside the brewer there. Just going to make this a bit easier to see. So we're going to be brewing just like that, straight into our cup. And this brewing device has got a nice little hole that you can see down into your cup, so you can see when it's getting full. but we're going to hopefully use the right amount of water, and that's what the scales for me are for. So I can judge. I'm going to use 15 grams of coffee in my filter, and I'm going to pour 250 grams of water from the kettle. You can use any kind of kettle. I've got a specific coffee pouring kettle.
I think it's going to be using the scales today, but yep, cool. I've got them out.
Nice. It's called a gooseneck because it's got this kind of long neck, and it means you can pour very precisely, because we like to make sure we're doing everything precisely when brewing coffee, because otherwise you can end up with coffee that's too strong, too weak, under extracted, over extracted. These are all variables that we want to make sure we're controlling, just so we get the best coffee every time. So if you open up your coffee, you got your bag inside. If you haven't already, you can tear across the top there and then open up the Z seal. Before you add any to your filter, this is an important step. What it's going to do is preheat the brewing device and our vessel, and also rinse the paper filter. So with a bit of your boiling water, hopefully you're all at the same stage and everyone's kettles are boiled. If they're not, I'll go quite slowly and then you can catch up. So we're just going to rinse the filter quite thoroughly. Just want to get rid of any kind of papery taste. And we're just going to let that kind of drain out into the cup. But this is where you'll need something to discard that, because we obviously want to get rid of that water before we continue brewing. So I've got another mug here, which I'm just going to tip my rinse water away in. So now that's a nicely rinsed filter.
Some people maybe in home offices now struggling a bit where to chuck them all.
Yeah.
I'm glad I went to the kitchen.
Or out the window, as long as there's no one downstairs outside.
True.
So now we've got a nicely preheated cup. Our filter is pre-rinsed so that we're not going to get any papery taste in the coffee. And that's all nicely preheated so that none of the brewing temperature is drained away in a cold brewer. So next thing we're going to do is add our coffee. I'm sure it may seem kind of simple. It's just brewing coffee, right? What can you do wrong? But there's a few little useful tips, like the pre-rinse, just to preheat everything. So I've got just a little teaspoon here. It's going to be about 3 heaped teaspoons, maybe a little bit more. If you've got a tablespoon or a coffee scoop or something, then it might only be a couple. But it's going to be about 15 grams if you are using scales. And because it's a very big brewer, it doesn't look like much at all. So if you can see that, that's about 15 grams of coffee in this big brewer. And you can get different size brewing devices as well. And the whole brewing process is only going to take about 3 minutes. So before you pour the water, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pour a small amount of water just to make all the coffee wet. When you roast coffee, there's one of the byproducts is carbon dioxide, and that's part of the reason the coffee stays fresh, is there's lots of gas in there, but it releases that gas slowly. We're going to pour about a small amount of water to help some of that gas release, because it can be a bit of a barrier to brewing. So once we've done it, it's called a bloom. So we're going to bloom the coffee with about 50 grams of water. We're going to let that sit for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to continue brewing. So I'm going to start my timer. And if you've got your kettle of boiling water, you can brew along.
How much did you say, Jack? How much water? Just a
small amount of water, just to get all the coffee wet. So you just want to make sure the coffee's it's kind of evenly wet across the top, and you should see some nice kind of bubbles bubbling away. I sometimes give it a little swirl to help it kind of mix together. Or if you've got a spoon, you can just give it a little stir at this point. And it shouldn't be too wet. It should be a bit of a kind of sludge. And the purpose of that is just to help some of that CO2 release before we start brewing, so that the water can get good access to the ground coffee, and there's no kind of CO2 sitting in there blocking any of the extraction happening. So we've given that about 40 seconds. So now I'm going to finish pouring the water in, and nice and slowly as well, just a gentle pour, going around in circles, just to help get all the coffee evenly wet. So we just want to make it all as even as possible. And maybe it would take you about 30 seconds to pour all of your water in. And I don't expect that you would go much higher in your brewer than about halfway. So I don't want to fill it too much because we're going to run out of space in this small cup. But if you are using scales, 250 grams is our target weight. So I'm just going to pour until I reach 250. Now it's about halfway up my brewer. So it's sitting about here, the water, and that's just going to gradually drain through the coffee. If you've got a spoon, you can give it a little stir just gently around the top. And that's just going to help make sure all the coffee's evenly brewing in there. And you can see through the little hole in the brewing device, you can see that it's filling up the cup. It's quite slowly, a bit of a drip. Mine is anyway, hopefully yours is quite similar. And the whole thing should take about 3 minutes. And it's a really nice time to have a smell of the coffee as well. We generally roast a little lighter than a lot of people are used to. Traditionally, lots of people expect coffee to taste that kind of almost ashy and kind of burnt and roasted flavors, which is what a lot of people expect. And that's what you get kind of tasting in instant coffee and generally lower quality coffees. But because we've got coffee that's had a lot of care taken, it's known as specialty coffee. And that's where quality is the most important thing over quantity. So that at the farm, the farmers, they hand pick, they keep a very close eye on the processing while the coffee is drying. It's normally laid out on patios, a huge load of coffee, and they rake it every day, multiple times a day to make sure it's drying evenly. And they store it very well as well, make sure it's not being contaminated by any other produce or any other moisture. And then so when we receive it, we know it's had a lot of care taken to it. So we want to make sure that we can highlight all the characteristics of that origin. So the Ugandan coffee has got some really interesting flavors to kind of pay respect to the quality that the farmers have produced for us. We don't want to roast it so that you can taste roasted flavors. We want to roast it to kind of light or medium level. And it looks a lot lighter than you might expect as well. Now this is the roasted coffee like I showed you a minute ago. And it's quite light in color. It's not like a dark oily coffee. Sometimes you get French roasts or Italian roasts and you get a lot of oil on the surface of those and they look very dark, sometimes almost black. But in those situations, you're not going to really taste the origin of the coffee. You're going to be tasting the roast profile. So by roasting lighter, you highlight more of the original characteristics. So my coffee is finished brewing now. Yours may have too, for the last few drips coming through. I'm just going to move my brewer onto another mug just to get that out of the way. And
this is where I'd add my sugar and milk now. So you're going to tell me not to.
I'd say have a sip first, because it's the reason that a lot of people add milk and sugar is to help it taste nicer, because they want it to be a bit sweeter and a bit less of that kind of ashiness that you often get from instant coffee and other coffees. But with this one, we aim to get a good level of sweetness, and there's absolutely sweetness you can get from coffee. Bitterness is the most common descriptor that people use. Coffee's bitter, and it can be, but we're trying to produce coffee that's nice and sweet, and you can definitely taste some sweetness when you've done a good brew. So your final kind of brewed coffee should look something like this. On the bottom, just a nice kind of flat level bed of coffee. That's all been extracted nice and evenly, we hope. So I'm going to move that aside. And that was a good amount for our little cup here. Now's a good time, again, to have another smell. About 80%, supposedly, of the taste of coffee is in the aroma, because your tastes are mainly sweet, sour, bitter, umami, and salty. But the flavor of the coffee is a lot in the kind of olfactory and in the aroma of the coffee. And it's got a really nice smell, this one. It's got that kind of, it does have a kind of festive feel to it, which is what we were going for with this particular blend. We were hoping for some sort of dried fruit, a little bit of spice. And often people actually ask, what have we added these flavors to the coffee? So you've got cranberry candy and nougat. We haven't added anything to make that happen. That's just some notes of some flavor notes that we've come up with, a bit like wine. Yeah, John, absolutely. Go for your cantuccini at this time. It's a really good moment to open up your cantuccini. Should be nice and crispy. They're really tasty.
One, isn't it? There's cranberry in it.
Cranberry in the cantuccini.
Yeah. Was it? My one maybe does. Cherry.
There's
cherries,
glacé cherries we've got, and in this one there's some pistachio. Really nice, dipped in the coffee, and that's why we provided those ones, because they're a good accompaniment to the coffee. It kind of soaks it up nicely because it's a crunchy biscuit. Let's have a little sip on the coffee.
First time I'm able to kind of drink coffee and eat biscuits in front of clients and prospects without feeling I forgot to turn my camera off.
Yeah. Well, no, I've heard that these sessions are normally done with beer or wine or something else. But I think coffee is a really good one as well, because lots of people drink it. It's a good thing to have at this time of day if you're having a morning conference. But also there's a bit of a preparation element to it. With beer, you pop open the bottle and drink it. Same with wine, same with most other things that you would consume, to be honest. But with coffee, there's so much to the preparation, and I find that really nice little ritual, and something that I've got really into at home on the weekends. I get up in the morning, flip the kettle on, just go through this kind of 10 or 15-minute process of grinding the coffee, weighing out the water, and it's just a nice little thing. That's the kind of bit that wakes me up, is going through the process of the coffee, and then this is the reward at the end of it. It's a little bit too hot for me to taste at the moment, but in a few minutes that will be a really tasty beverage, hopefully. And I hope you will enjoy it too. We really have a passion here at UE for sharing this coffee with people. We want to make sure everyone enjoys their coffee, because it is a really special thing. One last thing I just wanted to talk about was sourcing, how we source the coffee, because it's not easy to get in touch with farmers around the world. They're in different parts of often very remote regions, and often at very high altitudes as well. And in places like Colombia, farmers, the average size of a farm is about 2.5 hectares, very small. A hectare is about the size of a football pitch. So very small farms. So if we were going to buy a huge load of coffee in, it's going to come from multiple farms. So they all come together. And where possible, we try and source as directly as possible with those farmers, often through cooperatives, where all their coffee from the local farms comes together to the central processing center. Maybe that could be one of the no, I was going to try and link it back in with a future coffee pun for you, John, for if you do another coffee session. You mentioned something about Java. That would have been a good one. Java's one Indonesian island where they brew coffee, and then you've got obviously the JavaScript. Anyway, I was saying about sourcing. Yeah, we try and source directly with the farmers, but where we can't, we use importers who are recognized as providing a very good level of pay for the good quality coffee. Something that people often ask us is about fair trade pricing. Fair trade is an interesting one in coffee, because fair trade is a minimum level for farmers to receive for their coffee. But because we're buying very good quality coffee, it's in high demand and therefore has a higher price anyway. So I think they can earn up to 6 times the fair trade level for this really good quality coffee. And it helps with their communities and helps with their children's education in the local villages and things. And quite often they are very remote regions where children have to sometimes walk hours to get to their school and then come home in the afternoon and work on the farm, on the coffee farm. And it's a really interesting and probably very different lifestyle to what we can imagine. But I haven't actually been to an origin to a coffee farm. I'd love to go and experience that. And it's definitely something on the list. But yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to share with you today some of this coffee. Hope you've got the rest of your bag to enjoy. So if you wanted to brew a couple of cups, you can just upscale the using your brew guide. If you go to the pour over page, it tells you it's going to be about 65 grams per liter. So if you're brewing in a different device or something else, you can flick through here. If you've got a cafetiere, you can use the French press guide. French press and cafetiere, same thing really. Or if you've got a Mocha Master or an espresso machine or something like that, refer to your brew guide, and there's lots of useful information in there to help you get the best out of the coffee. I'd say this grind is suitable for anything other than espresso. Espresso, you need a very fine grind. But I'd love to answer some questions if anyone has any. If not now, then you can always send me an email later. We can send out my email address or something. I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem. but enjoy your coffee. It's been great to be here with you this morning. And like I said, if anyone's in the area, come and see us in Witney, Oxfordshire. We'd love to have you here at the roastery. So I'll pass back over to you, John.
Thanks, Jack. And I think now more than ever, as we change our working habits and work from home, having those rituals is really key. Change the morning if it's setting up, brewing that instant cup of coffee and not thinking about it. Build it into your ritual. So I think I do like that idea. You have given me kettle envy. I've never thought I'd have kettle envy before. You have given me that. So Jack, thank you. There's a couple of questions popped up, but they're not quite linked to the coffee and roasting, but I've learned some stuff as well. And I kind of summarize now as well. So as I said, take this next kind of minute or two if you do have a question, as I said, related to what Jack spoke about, or there's a couple there for Ross and probably myself. So if they come up, take this time now to kind of write up what those are. But Jack, thank you. And I like the idea of, and I'll try and link two of them back, and please go with me here. This is ad hoc, non-checked through. We talked about what we're seeing, and I don't know whether our customers and prospects on the line see this, but we've typically, if I take back the last 20 years, the last 18 years, we've been speaking to typically IT infrastructure, either operations or managers on that side. But what we're seeing is that blending now between infrastructure and also now compliance and security. So, that's one of the reasons we partnered with Netskope, is because the conversations have moved away from just infrastructure. They've moved into that. How do we make sure we've got the right policy and processes in place? And how do we make sure that we've got the right security? And those are blending together. So maybe I'm bringing those blended conversations with the Brazil-Ugandan roast, Jack, you spoke about earlier. And Blue Source, we've been front and center in trying to make sure we're involved in making sure the right blend alongside the compliance and security world works alongside the Microsoft Office 365 and Azure world as well. So that was good. Some of the things we've talked about today, Ross has put up there, we've got something called Prove It. It's great, and thank you again for joining us this morning. And we're going to tell you some stuff, but we always like to be able to prove it. And we either prove that through assessments and workshops, but there's a campaign by Netskope at the moment where it's a straightforward prove it. So if there's any area in particular on your cloud journey and you want to understand the SASE type implementation aspects of that, please reach out to us as well, and we can prove it to you, so to speak. We'd love to carry on the conversation. What we've tried not to do today is go down the COVID. So we've mentioned it once. Today was, hopefully, it's one of the first ones you've been on where it hasn't been mentioned too much. So it's really, make sure that you're getting the most out of this morning. Now, I've given a couple of minutes, a touch of waffle, maybe some of it, but hopefully it has made sense to some people. And we've got a couple of questions there. Let me just bear with me. There are a couple of questions here. Okay. Where does SASE start and finish compared to the firewall's capability? So I suppose that's very much traditional as we move towards next generation. Ross, I'll probably pass that one to you to maybe ask that question or answer that question.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, when you think about firewalls, traditionally they are always in the data center. They were there at that perimeter that you had in the data center, right? So the use of the firewall for controlling things like web usage and cloud applications, yeah, some of them, next generation firewalls can recognize some of that traffic, but they're not typically full proxies, which means they can't actually look into what's happening, the data that's moving. And that's ultimately what we care about. We care about what data it is that's moving out to the cloud apps and how it's being used by your employees, by your users. So I think firewalls within the SASE framework, firewalls are talked about as firewall as a service. And what that to a user working from home, by filtering them in the cloud for their web access, you can also put a firewall in front of them. So basically that means you're expanding your control beyond just port 80 and port 443 and expanding it to any other ports, right? So if that machine gets infected or by some threat that tries to use weird and wonderful ports, you can prevent it from, calling home to its bot network or uploading data to some server somewhere. So the firewall has a place in SASE, but it has a slightly different meaning too, because it is all about protecting the user rather than protecting the data center.
Yeah, no, fair point. I'm conscious of time, what I don't want to do, I know everyone's a busy morning, so again, thank everyone. Ross, thank you. Been great to have you on this morning. Jack, thank you very much for your blend. It's always nice to speak to the person blending the coffee and talking us through how to even get the measurements right. Even you helping me do that, it has been a great help. And as I said, changing those rituals as we move to more working from home. And obviously from an IT perspective, how do we support you and your organizations and your users around their data and making sure they can work from home securely and compliantly as well. So we'd love to carry on the conversation. If you're moving to a heavy cloud usage away from infrastructure, please reach out to BlueSource. Guys, thank you very much for your time today, both from the panelists, and hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll speak all together very soon, hopefully in the new year. But be safe to you and your families, and guys, have a good day and a good Christmas as well. So thank you from BlueSource, from Netskope, and from UE Coffees as well. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.